The stagecoach wheels kicked up dust that settled on Julia Bennett's black morning dress like a shroud of the life she was leaving behind. And when the driver announced they had arrived in Salida, Colorado territory, in the summer heat of 1878, her stomach twisted with uncertainty about whether she had made the right choice in coming west to marry a man she had only known through letters. The doubt sat heavy in her chest as she peered through the leather curtain at the rough wooden buildings lining the main street, wondering if Thomas Whitmore would even recognize her from the photograph she had sent 3 months prior. The stagecoach lurched to a stop outside the Rocky Mountain Hotel, and Julia gathered her carpetbag with trembling fingers. At 23 years old, she had thought herself too practical for romance, too sensible to believe in fairy tales. Her parents had died within months of each other back in Philadelphia, leaving her with nothing but debts, and the fading hope that her secretarial skills might secure her a position somewhere respectable. Then Thomas's advertisement had appeared in the newspaper, looking for a bride willing to relocate to Colorado territory, and she had responded out of desperation more than desire. The driver opened the door and offered his weathered hand to help her down. Julia stepped into the afternoon sunlight, squinting against the brightness that seemed so much more intense here than back east. The air smelled of pine and dust and horse manure, and the sound of a piano drifted from one of the saloons down the street. She stood on the wooden sidewalk, scanning the faces of the men who passed by, looking for someone who might be looking for her. Minutes stretched into a quarter hour. Julia's doubt deepened with each passing moment. She clutched her carpetbag tighter, feeling foolish standing there in her morning clothes while men in dusty cowboy hats tipped their heads at her and women in calico dresses gave her curious glances. Perhaps Thomas had changed his mind. Perhaps he had found someone else, someone prettier or younger or less desperate. "Miss Bennett." A voice called from behind her, and Julia turned with a surge of relief. The man approaching was not Thomas Whitmore. She knew this immediately because Thomas had described himself as tall and fair-haired in his letters, and this man was neither. He stood about average height with dark hair that curled slightly beneath his worn hat, and his face bore the weathered tan of someone who spent his days in the sun. His eyes were a striking blue-green, like the color of the ocean in paintings Julia had seen in Philadelphia galleries. "Yes, I am Julia Bennett," she said, trying to keep the disappointment from her voice. The man removed his hat, revealing more of those dark curls. He held the hat against his chest in a gesture that seemed both respectful and awkward. "My name is Quinn Lawrence, madam. I work at the Double T Ranch with Thomas Whitmore. He asked me to meet you here." Julia's heart sank further. He could not come himself. Quinn's expression shifted, and Julia saw something like pity cross his features. He glanced around the street as if searching for privacy, then gestured toward the hotel entrance. "Might we step inside, Miss Bennett? There is something I need to tell you, and you should probably sit down." The doubt in Julia's heart transformed into cold dread. She followed Quinn into the hotel lobby, where he spoke briefly with the clerk and secured a table in the small dining room off to the side. They sat across from each other, and Julia noticed the way Quinn kept turning his hat in his hands, a nervous gesture that did not bode well. "Please just tell me," Julia said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Has Thomas changed his mind about the marriage?" "No, madam, it is not that," Quinn said, then paused, seeming to gather his words. "Thomas Whitmore died 4 days ago. A horse threw him up in the high pasture and he hit his head on a rock. He never woke up. We buried him yesterday on the ranch." The words seemed to come from very far away. Julia sat perfectly still, trying to process what she had just heard. She had traveled nearly 2,000 miles to marry a man who no longer existed. She had spent the last of her money on the stagecoach fare. She had no family to return to, no home waiting for her back east. The doubt she had carried transformed into something much worse, a yawning emptiness that threatened to swallow her whole. "I see," she heard herself say, though she did not see at all. Nothing made sense. "Thank you for telling me." Quinn leaned forward, his eyes full of concern. "Miss Bennett, I know this is terrible news, and I am sorry to be the one delivering it. Thomas was a good man and a good friend. He talked about you constantly these past weeks, about how excited he was that you were coming. He showed everyone your photograph. He was planning to build a bigger cabin for the two of you." Julia felt tears prick at her eyes, but she refused to let them fall, not here in front of this stranger. She had cried enough when her parents died, had cried herself empty during those long nights in Philadelphia when she realized she had nothing left. She would not cry now. "What am I supposed to do?" The question came out before she could stop it, and she hated how small her voice sounded. Quinn set his hat down on the table and met her eyes directly. "The ranch foreman, Mr. Henderson. He wanted me to tell you that the Double T will pay for your stay here at the hotel for a week. That should give you time to figure out your next step. If you want to return east, we will arrange for a ticket. And Thomas, he had saved up some money for the wedding and for setting up the household. Mr. Henderson says that money rightfully belongs to you since Thomas had already made his intentions clear." "I could not possibly accept money," Julia said immediately. "We were never married. I have no claim to anything Thomas saved." "With respect, madam, you came all this way based on a promise. Thomas would have wanted you to have something for your trouble." The word trouble felt inadequate for what Julia was experiencing, but she appreciated the gesture nonetheless. She looked at Quinn Lawrence more carefully now, taking in the genuine kindness in his expression, the way he seemed uncomfortable with the situation but determined to do right by her. His clothes were worn but clean, his hands calloused but his manner gentle. "Are you married, Mr. Lawrence?" The question surprised them both. Quinn blinked. "No, madam, never found the right woman, I suppose." "Then perhaps you can understand that for some of us, marriage is not just about finding the right person. Sometimes it is about survival." Julia straightened her spine, calling on the same strength that had gotten her through her parents' deaths and the subsequent financial ruin. "I will accept the hotel stay for 1 week with gratitude, but I will not take Thomas's money unless I can earn it. Is there work available in Salida? I have experience with bookkeeping and correspondence. I can read and write and cipher." Quinn's eyes widened slightly, as if he had not expected such a response. "Well, madam, I know the general store owner was complaining just last week about needing help with his accounts, and the hotel here sometimes needs someone to help with their ledgers. Might be you could find something." "Then I will begin looking tomorrow." Julia stood, and Quinn quickly rose as well. "Thank you for bringing me the news, Mr. Lawrence. I appreciate your kindness in what must have been an uncomfortable errand. I wish I could have brought better news, Miss Bennett." Quinn picked up his hat, turning it in his hands again. "If there is anything you need, anything at all, you can send word out to the Double T Ranch. It is about 5 miles north of town. Any of the locals can give you directions." Julia nodded, and Quinn left the dining room, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. Once he was gone, Julia allowed herself to sink back into the chair. She sat there for a long time, staring at nothing, feeling the weight of her circumstances settle over her like a heavy blanket. She was alone in a strange territory with no prospects and nowhere to go. The doubt she had felt arriving in Salida had been justified after all, but Julia Bennett had not survived the past year by giving in to despair. She would figure this out, just as she had figured out everything else. She would find work, earn money, and build a new life here in Colorado territory if that was what needed to happen. She had come west seeking security, and she would find it somehow, even without Thomas Whitmore. That night, Julia lay in the hotel bed and allowed herself to grieve, not for Thomas, whom she had never known, but for the life she had imagined, the certainty she had hoped to find. Tomorrow she would be strong again. Tonight she could admit to herself that she was terrified. The morning sun filtered through the thin hotel curtains and woke Julia before dawn. She had slept poorly, her dreams filled with images of faceless men and endless empty roads. She rose and dressed carefully in her other dress, a simple gray cotton that was less oppressive than the black morning clothes. She braided her auburn hair and pinned it up, then studied her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. Green eyes looked back at her, shadowed with exhaustion but determined. The hotel dining room served breakfast to its guests, and Julia ate sparingly, making the meal last while she observed the other patrons and listened to their conversations. She learned that Salida had been incorporated just 2 years prior, in 1876, and was growing rapidly due to its position along the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad. The town served as a hub for the surrounding ranches and mining operations, and there seemed to be a general sense of optimism about the territory's future. After breakfast, Julia set out to explore the town with purpose. Her first stop was Brennan's General Store, a well-stocked establishment that carried everything from flour and sugar to farming equipment and ready-made clothes. The owner, Mr. Brennan, was a portly man in his 50s with mutton-chop sideburns and a harried expression. Julia waited until he had finished with another customer, then approached the counter. "Excuse me, Mr. Brennan. My name is Julia Bennett, and I am new to Salida. I was told you might have need of someone skilled with accounts and bookkeeping." Mr. Brennan looked her up and down, not unkindly. "You are the young lady who was supposed to marry Thomas Whitmore, are you not? Terrible business, that. He was a good customer, always paid his bills on time." "Yes, sir. I find myself in need of employment, and I have considerable experience with financial records and correspondence." "Can you prove that?" Julia had anticipated this question. She reached into her reticule and pulled out a letter of reference from her previous employer in Philadelphia, a lawyer who had praised her meticulous record-keeping and clear handwriting. Mr. Brennan read it carefully, then looked at Julia with new respect. "I could use someone 2 days a week to help organize my accounts and write up orders to suppliers. The pay would not be much, maybe $2 a week, but it is honest work." $2 a week was not enough to live on, but it was a start. "I would be grateful for the opportunity, Mr. Brennan." They arranged for Julia to begin the following Monday, and she left the store feeling slightly more hopeful. Her next stop was the hotel, where she spoke with the manager about their bookkeeping needs. The manager, a thin woman named Mrs. Fletcher, agreed to hire Julia for 1 day a week at $1.50, provided her work proved satisfactory. By midday, Julia had secured another small position helping the local doctor, Dr. Garrison, with his patient records and billing. The work would be sporadic, as he only needed assistance when his records became too disorganized to manage, but he agreed to pay her 50 cents for each session of work. It was not much, but cobbled together, these positions would provide Julia with enough income to afford a modest room in a boarding house. She would need to be frugal, but she had been poor before. She could manage. Julia was walking back to the hotel, mentally calculating her expected earnings when she nearly collided with Quinn Lawrence outside the feed store. He caught her elbow to steady her, then quickly released it, his face coloring slightly. "Miss Bennett, forgive me. I was not watching where I was going. The fault was mine, Mr. Lawrence. I was lost in thought." They stood there awkwardly for a moment. Quinn was carrying a large sack of grain over one shoulder, making him look even broader than Julia had initially thought. In the full daylight, she noticed details she had missed the day before: the small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners as if he smiled often, the strong line of his jaw. "How are you managing?" Quinn asked. "Is the hotel treating you well?" "Yes, very well, thank you. And I have good news. I have secured employment with several businesses in town. It seems there is a need for someone with my skills after all." Quinn's face broke into a genuine smile, and Julia felt something flutter in her chest. "That is wonderful news, Miss Bennett. I am glad to hear it. Thomas would be pleased to know you are landing on your feet." The mention of Thomas created an uncomfortable silence. Julia found herself wanting to ask Quinn more about the man she had almost married, but it seemed inappropriate somehow. Before she could think of what to say, Quinn shifted the grain sack on his shoulder. "I should get this loaded onto the wagon. But Miss Bennett, if I may, there is a church social on Sunday afternoon. The whole town usually attends, and it would be a good opportunity for you to meet more people. If you need someone to escort you, I would be happy to do so." Julia hesitated. She did not want people to think she was setting her cap at Quinn Lawrence, especially so soon after Thomas's death. But he was right that meeting more townspeople could lead to additional work opportunities, and she appreciated his thoughtfulness in extending the invitation. "That would be kind of you, Mr. Lawrence. Thank you. I will call for you at the hotel at 2 o'clock on Sunday then." Quinn tipped his hat and headed toward a wagon hitched outside the feed store. Julia continued to the hotel, her mind spinning. She told herself she was being practical, nothing more. Quinn Lawrence was simply being neighborly, probably out of a sense of obligation to his deceased friend. There was nothing more to it than that. But that night, as she lay in bed, Julia found herself thinking about the way Quinn's eyes had lit up when she told him about finding work, the genuine pleasure in his expression. She pushed the thoughts away firmly. She had come to Colorado territory seeking security and stability, not romance. Her heart was too full of doubt to risk on feelings that might lead nowhere. The days passed quickly. Julia threw herself into her new employment with determination, proving herself capable and efficient at every task. Mr. Brennan was particularly pleased with how quickly she organized his chaotic ledgers, and Mrs. Fletcher at the hotel began asking her opinion on various business matters. Sunday arrived bright and clear. Julia dressed in her best day dress, a deep blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. She had purchased a new ribbon at the general store, a small indulgence, and used it to trim her bonnet. When Quinn arrived at precisely 2 o'clock, she was waiting in the hotel lobby. He had cleaned up for the occasion, his hair still damp from washing, his shirt pressed and his boots polished. He held a small bouquet of wildflowers, which he offered to Julia with an almost boyish shyness. "I picked these this morning," he said. "Thought they might brighten your room." Julia accepted the flowers, touched by the gesture. "They are lovely, Mr. Lawrence. Thank you. Please call me Quinn. Mr. Lawrence makes me sound like my father." "Then you must call me Julia." They walked to the church together, falling into an easy conversation about the town and the surrounding area. Quinn had been born in Missouri, but had come west 5 years ago, seeking adventure and opportunity. He had worked at several ranches before settling at the Double T, where the foreman treated his men fairly and the work was steady. "You ever regret leaving Missouri?" Julia asked. Quinn considered this. "Sometimes I miss my family, especially my mother's cooking. But no, I do not regret coming west. There is something about this country that gets into your blood. The mountains, the big sky, the sense that you can make something of yourself through hard work. Back in Missouri, everything was already settled and claimed. Here, there are still possibilities. Julia understood exactly what he meant. Despite the circumstances that had brought her here, she felt the same sense of possibility. In Philadelphia, she had been drowning in the past, weighed down by her parents' deaths and the social expectations that limited what a woman alone could accomplish. Here, no one knew her history. She could become whoever she chose to be. The church social was held in a large meadow behind the white-painted church building. Tables had been set up under the shade of cottonwood trees, laden with food brought by the townspeople. Children ran and played while adults gathered in small groups, talking and laughing. A few musicians had brought their instruments, and lively music filled the air. Quinn introduced Julia to what seemed like everyone in Salida. She met ranchers and shopkeepers, miners and their wives, the school teacher and the blacksmith. Everyone was friendly and welcoming, though Julia caught a few curious glances and knew people were wondering about her relationship with Quinn. She could hardly blame them. It did look particular, the way he stayed close to her side, making sure she felt included in conversations and had plenty to eat. At one point, Julia found herself sitting at a table with several women while Quinn had wandered off to speak with some of the men. The women asked polite questions about her journey west and her impressions of Colorado territory. One woman, Mrs. Sarah Perkins, the wife of a local rancher, leaned in with a conspiratorial smile. "Quinn Lawrence is a good man," she said. "One of the best. Any woman would be lucky to catch his eye." Julia felt her cheeks warm. "Quinn is simply being kind to me out of respect for his friend Thomas. There is nothing more to it." "Of course, dear," Mrs. Perkins said, though her knowing smile suggested she thought otherwise. "Still, kindness is as good a foundation as any for deeper feelings. My husband started courting me by helping my father fix a broken wagon wheel. Sometimes the best love stories begin with simple gestures." Julia excused herself to get some lemonade, needing a moment alone with her thoughts. She stood by the refreshment table, watching Quinn across the meadow. He was laughing at something one of the other men had said, his whole face transformed by joy. He looked younger when he laughed, less burdened. As if sensing her gaze, Quinn looked up and caught her eye. He smiled and started making his way back to her. Julia's heart did something complicated in her chest, a flutter that had nothing to do with doubt and everything to do with a feeling she was not quite ready to name. "Are you having a good time?" Quinn asked when he reached her. "Yes, everyone has been very welcoming. Thank you for bringing me." "I am glad." Quinn hesitated, then said, "Julia, I hope you do not mind me saying, but you seem different today, less worried than when you first arrived." Julia considered this. He was right. The constant anxiety that had gripped her since leaving Philadelphia had eased somewhat. She still had concerns about her future, but they no longer felt overwhelming. "I suppose I am beginning to feel like perhaps things will work out after all. Colorado is starting to feel less strange." "Good. You belong here." Quinn said this with such conviction that Julia looked at him in surprise. He seemed to realize how his words might sound and quickly added, "What I mean is, you fit in well. The town is lucky to have someone with your skills and determination." They were interrupted by the musicians striking up a waltz. Several couples moved to an area of trampled grass that served as a dance floor. Quinn shifted his weight, looking uncertain. "I am not much of a dancer," he admitted. "But if you would like to, I could manage not to step on your feet too badly." Julia had not danced since before her parents died, and the thought of being in Quinn's arms, even in the respectable context of a country dance, made her pulse quicken. But she heard herself saying yes, and then his hand was at her waist, and her hand was in his, and they were moving to the music. Quinn had been modest about his dancing ability. He was actually quite good, leading her smoothly around the makeshift dance floor. Julia allowed herself to relax into the music and the movement, aware of the warmth of Quinn's hand through the fabric of her dress, the way he held her at exactly the proper distance, respectful but attentive. "You are very quiet," Quinn said after a moment. "I am thinking." "About what?" Julia looked up at him. "About how strange life is. A week ago I thought I knew exactly what my future would hold. Now everything has changed, and yet somehow I find myself dancing at a church social in Colorado, feeling happier than I have felt in months. It makes no sense." "Maybe happiness does not have to make sense," Quinn said. "Maybe it just happens when we stop trying to control everything and let life surprise us." It was a surprisingly philosophical observation from a cowboy, and Julia found herself smiling. "Is that what you do? Let life surprise you?" "I try. Though I will admit, you have surprised me more than most." "How so?" Quinn's expression grew serious. "Most women in your situation would have fallen apart or gotten on the next stage back east. But you stayed, found work, made the best of terrible circumstances. That takes courage." "I admire it." Julia felt tears prick at her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. She blinked them back quickly. "I did not have much choice. We always have choices. You chose strength over despair. That means something." The music ended and they broke apart. Julia felt suddenly cold without Quinn's hand at her waist. Other dancers were leaving the floor, and she and Quinn walked back toward the tables. The sun was beginning to set, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple. The social began to wind down as families gathered their belongings and started heading home. Quinn walked Julia back to the hotel as the street lamps were being lit, casting pools of warm light along the wooden sidewalks. They moved slowly, as if neither wanted the afternoon to end. "Thank you for today," Julia said when they reached the hotel entrance. "I enjoyed myself more than I expected to." "I did as well." Quinn removed his hat, holding it against his chest in that gesture Julia was beginning to recognize as characteristic of him. "Julia, I wonder if I might call on you again. Perhaps we could have supper together one evening this week." Julia's first instinct was to say no, to protect herself from the vulnerability of wanting something that might not work out. But she thought about what Quinn had said about letting life surprise you, about choosing strength over despair. Maybe that meant being brave enough to accept kindness, to open herself to possibilities even when they scared her. "I would like that," she said softly. Quinn's face lit up. "Wednesday evening. I could meet you here at 6. "Wednesday at 6, Julia confirmed. She watched him walk away into the gathering dusk, his long stride carrying him quickly down the street. Then she went inside, climbed the stairs to her room, and sat on the bed with the wildflowers he had given her. She buried her face in them, breathing in their sweet scent, and allowed herself to feel something she had not felt in a very long time: hope. The next few days passed in a pleasant blur of work and anticipation. Julia settled into her various jobs, earning praise from all her employers. Mr. Brennan told her he wanted to increase her hours, and Dr. Garrison asked if she might be willing to help him organize his entire office, not just his billing records. Julia agreed to both, knowing the extra income would allow her to save a little money each week. She moved out of the hotel and into a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Carmichael. The room was small but clean, with a window that looked out over a garden where Mrs. Carmichael grew vegetables and flowers. The other boarders were a mix of railroad workers and store clerks, all of them polite and respectful. Julia felt herself beginning to build a life in Salida, piece by piece. Wednesday arrived, and Julia dressed carefully for supper with Quinn, choosing her blue dress again and taking extra time with her hair. Mrs. Carmichael noticed her preparations and gave her an approving nod. "That cowboy who was asking after you must be someone special," the older woman said. "Quinn, he has been very kind to me. Kind is good, but the way you are blushing suggests he might be more than just kind." Julia could not deny it. Over the past week, she had found her thoughts returning to Quinn again and again. The way he smiled, the sound of his laugh, the gentleness in his eyes when he looked at her. She had tried to tell herself she was being foolish, that she barely knew him, that she should not be thinking about another man when she had so recently been planning to marry Thomas. But her heart seemed to have its own ideas. Quinn arrived exactly on time, looking handsome in a clean shirt and vest. He had shaved and gotten a haircut, and Julia could smell bay rum cologne when he offered his arm. They walked to a small restaurant called the Silver Spoon that served simple but good food. Over plates of roasted chicken and potatoes, they talked about everything and nothing. Quinn asked about Julia's life in Philadelphia, and she found herself telling him things she had not spoken of in months. About her father's bookshop, and how she had loved helping him with inventory. About her mother's garden and her skill with healing herbs. About the quiet devastation of watching them both succumb to illness within months of each other. About the discovery that they had been living beyond their means for years, trying to keep up appearances. "I was so angry at first," Julia admitted. "Angry that they had left me with nothing, that they had been so irresponsible. But then, I realized they had been doing what they thought was best. My father believed keeping up a good front would help his business. My mother thought hosting the right social events would help me find a suitable husband. They were wrong, but their intentions were good." Quinn reached across the table and took her hand. The gesture was forward, but Julia did not pull away. His hand was warm and rough and steady. "You have every right to be angry," Quinn said, "and every right to forgive them. Both feelings can be true at the same time." Julia turned her hand in his so their fingers intertwined. "Is that the voice of experience?" Quinn nodded slowly. "My father and I did not part on good terms when I left Missouri. He wanted me to stay and work the family farm, said I was abandoning my responsibilities. We had terrible words, both said things we should not have. He died 2 years ago and we never reconciled. I am still working through what I feel about that. I am sorry. Me too. But it taught me something important. Life is too short to hold on to anger or fear. If something matters to you, you have to reach for it, even if you might get hurt." Julia met his eyes across the table. The restaurant had grown quieter as other diners left, and it felt as if they were in their own private world. "Is that what you are doing now, reaching for something?" "Yes," Quinn said simply. "I am reaching for you, Julia Bennett. I know the timing is terrible. I know you just lost Thomas, and you have every reason to want to take things slow. But I need you to know that I am interested in more than just being kind. From the moment I saw you standing outside that hotel, looking so determined despite being scared half to death, I felt something. And every time I see you, that feeling gets stronger." Julia's heart raced. Part of her wanted to pull her hand away to protect herself from the vulnerability of this moment. But a larger part, the part that had been growing stronger since she arrived in Colorado, wanted to be brave. "I feel it too," she whispered. "And it terrifies me." Quinn smiled. "Good. The best things in life should be a little terrifying. Otherwise, how do you know they matter?" They finished their meal and walked back to the boarding house slowly, holding hands now without pretense. The night air was cool and full of stars, more stars than Julia had ever seen in her life. Quinn pointed out constellations, telling her their names and the stories behind them. Julia listened, less interested in the astronomy than in the sound of his voice, the way his thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. At the boarding house gate, Quinn turned to face her. "May I call on you again? Properly, I mean. As a suitor, not just as a friend." Julia's mind raced. They had known each other for barely 2 weeks. By all reasonable standards, this was too fast, too soon. But when had her life ever followed reasonable standards? She had crossed a continent to marry a stranger. She had rebuilt her life from nothing in a place she had never seen before. Why should her heart follow a more cautious path than her feet had? "Yes," she said. "You may call on me as a suitor." Quinn's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently, a gesture so old-fashioned and sweet that Julia felt her insides turn to honey. Then he bid her good night and walked away, whistling a cheerful tune. Julia went inside and climbed the stairs to her room in a daze. She got ready for bed mechanically, her mind replaying every moment of the evening. When she finally lay down, she pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heart beat strong and fast. The doubt she had carried for so long was still there, but it was shrinking, being slowly replaced by something else. Certainty. The certainty that whatever was happening between her and Quinn was real and worth fighting for. The next few weeks passed in a golden haze. Quinn came into town twice a week, timing his errands to coincide with Julia's schedule. They had supper together, took long walks, attended another church social. Quinn introduced Julia to his horse, a gentle sorrel mare named Ruby, and took her riding through the countryside surrounding Salida. Julia, who had never ridden more than a placid pony in a Philadelphia park, found herself galloping across open meadows, laughing with exhilaration and fear in equal measure. Quinn told her about life at the Double T Ranch, about the long days of work and the satisfaction of caring for cattle, about sleeping under the stars during summer roundups, and the camaraderie among the ranch hands. Julia talked about her dreams of someday having her own bookkeeping business, of being truly independent and secure. "You will do it," Quinn said with absolute confidence. "You have the brains and the drive. Nothing can stop you." "What about you?" Julia asked. "Do you want to be a ranch hand forever?" Quinn leaned back against a tree trunk where they had stopped to rest during a ride. "I have been saving money. My dream is to have my own place someday. Nothing big, maybe 50 or 60 acres, enough for a small herd and a good house. Somewhere I could build a life." "That sounds wonderful." Quinn looked at her intently. "Would you want that? A ranch life, I mean. It is hard work, especially for women. Long hours, isolation, uncertainty about weather and market prices." Julia understood he was really asking whether she could see herself in that future with him. They had been courting for only a month, but out here in the West, people moved faster. Life was too unpredictable to waste time. "I grew up in a city," Julia said slowly, "but I do not think that is where I belong. These past weeks, being out here in this vast open country, I feel like I can breathe for the first time in years. So yes, I think I could want that kind of life. With the right person." Quinn reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her cheek. "Julia Bennett, you are the most remarkable woman I have ever met." She turned her face into his palm, feeling the warmth of his skin against hers. "Kiss me, Quinn." He did, soft and sweet at first, then deeper as Julia responded. It was her first real kiss, and it felt like falling and flying at the same time. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. "I am falling in love with you," he said. "I need you to know that." Julia's eyes filled with tears, but they were happy tears. "I am falling in love with you too. It scares me how much. We will figure it out together, I promise." They rode back to town slowly, reluctant to let the afternoon end. But as they approached Salida, they saw unusual activity. A crowd had gathered near the general store, and people were talking in agitated voices. Quinn and Julia exchanged worried glances and urged their horses forward. Mr. Brennan was in the center of the crowd, looking distressed. When he saw Julia, he called out to her, "Miss Bennett, thank goodness. I need your help. There has been a mistake with a large supply order and the company is threatening to cancel our account. I cannot make sense of these invoices they sent. Can you look at them?" Julia dismounted quickly. "Of course, Mr. Brennan. Show me what you have." For the next 2 hours, Julia pored over invoices and shipping documents, tracking down the source of the confusion. It turned out the supply company had recorded payments under the wrong account number, making it appear that Mr. Brennan had not paid for previous orders when in fact he had. Julia wrote a detailed letter explaining the error, including copies of the canceled checks and corrected account numbers, then helped Mr. Brennan compose a telegram to send to the company's main office in Denver. By the time she finished, it was dark, and a small crowd had gathered to watch her work. When she finally declared the matter resolved, Mr. Brennan clasped her hands in his. "You saved my business, Miss Bennett. That supply company provides half my inventory. If they had canceled my account, I would have been ruined. I cannot thank you enough." "I am just glad I could help," Julia said, though she felt a warm glow of pride at having solved such a complex problem. Quinn had waited the entire time, sitting patiently on the store's porch. When Julia emerged, exhausted but satisfied, he stood and offered his arm. "You were amazing in there. Watching you work was like watching an artist paint." Julia laughed. "It was just bookkeeping." "No, it was more than that. You saw patterns and connections that no one else could see." "You have a gift, Julia." They walked slowly to the boarding house. At the gate, Quinn pulled Julia close and kissed her again, longer this time with a heat that made her forget the cool night air. When they parted, his eyes were dark with desire. "Marry me," Quinn said suddenly. "I know we have not been courting long, but I am certain about this, about us. I love you, Julia, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you." Julia's breath caught. Every practical bone in her body told her this was too fast, too risky. But her heart, that traitorous organ that had led her west in the first place, was singing with joy. "Yes," she heard herself say. "Yes, I will marry you." Quinn let out a whoop of happiness that probably woke half the boarding house. He picked Julia up and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, they were both breathless and giddy. "We should do it soon," Quinn said. "I do not want to wait." "Do you?" Julia shook her head. She had waited long enough for happiness. She was done being cautious. "As soon as we can arrange it." They made plans quickly, keeping things simple. The wedding would take place in 3 weeks, giving them time to make basic arrangements, but not so long that they had to endure an extended engagement. Quinn would speak to the ranch foreman about taking time off and finding a small house they could rent in town. Julia would continue her bookkeeping work, at least initially. They were both practical enough to know they would need both incomes to save for Quinn's dream of buying land. The next 3 weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Julia used some of her saved money to purchase fabric and sewed herself a simple but elegant wedding dress in cream-colored cotton with lace trim. Mrs. Carmichael and some of the other women in town helped with the work, and Julia found herself embraced by a community that had been strangers just 2 months earlier. Quinn managed to secure a small 2-room house at the edge of town, and he spent his free time making repairs and improvements. Julia visited when she could, offering opinions on paint colors and furniture placement. They were building a life together, piece by piece, and Julia found joy in every small decision. The night before the wedding, Julia lay awake thinking about how much had changed since she first arrived in Salida. She had come west with her heart full of doubt, expecting nothing more than a marriage of convenience to a stranger. Instead, she had found real love with a man who made her laugh and challenged her to be brave. The doubt that had weighed her down for so long had been replaced by something solid and sure. Certainty. Not the false certainty of thinking she could control everything, but the deeper certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, she and Quinn would face them together. The wedding took place on a brilliant September afternoon in 1878, with mountains visible through the church windows and the whole town in attendance. Julia wore her cream dress and carried wildflowers similar to the ones Quinn had given her that first Sunday. Quinn wore his best suit, his hair slicked back, his eyes never leaving Julia's face as she walked down the aisle. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. When the preacher asked if they would love and cherish each other until death parted them, both Julia and Quinn answered with strong, clear voices. They exchanged simple gold bands that Quinn had ordered from Denver. And when the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Quinn kissed Julia with such tenderness that several women in the congregation wiped away tears. The reception was held in the same meadow where the church socials took place. Tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by townspeople. The musicians played and Julia danced with her new husband under the Colorado sky, feeling happier than she had thought possible. Late in the afternoon, Mr. Henderson, the foreman from the Double T Ranch, pulled Quinn and Julia aside. He handed Quinn an envelope, his weathered face serious. "Thomas Whitmore had a life insurance policy," Mr. Henderson said. "It was not much, just $500, but he had named Miss Bennett as the beneficiary even before she arrived. I have been holding this since his death, waiting for the right time." "Seems to me a wedding day is the right time." Julia started to protest, but Quinn squeezed her hand gently, silencing her. Mr. Henderson continued, "Thomas would have wanted you to have this, both of you. He talked about building a life with a good woman. Now you have found each other and maybe some of his dreams can still come true, just in a different way." Julia accepted the envelope with tears streaming down her face. "We will use it wisely, I promise. We will build something good." "I know you will," Mr. Henderson said, then smiled. "Now go on, enjoy your wedding day. You have earned it." As the sun set, Quinn and Julia said goodbye to their guests and walked to their little house at the edge of town. Quinn carried Julia over the threshold, both of them laughing at the traditional gesture. Inside, the house was simple but cozy, with wildflowers in jars on the table and quilts on the bed that the church ladies had given as a wedding present. Quinn set Julia down gently, then cupped her face in his hands. "Hello, Mrs. Lawrence." "Hello, Mr. Lawrence," Julia replied, her heart so full she thought it might burst. They made love for the first time that night, nervous and tender and full of joy. Afterward, lying in Quinn's arms with her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat, Julia thought about the journey that had brought her here. She had traveled across a continent, lost the man she was supposed to marry, and found work in a strange town. Every step had been difficult, every choice uncertain, but all of it had led to this moment, to this man, to this feeling of being exactly where she belonged. "What are you thinking?" Quinn asked, his voice drowsy. "That I am happy. That I did not think I would ever feel this way again after my parents died, but I do." Quinn pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you stay this happy." "Do not make promises you cannot keep," Julia teased gently. "Life has a way of throwing challenges at us. Then I promise we will face those challenges together, that I can keep." Julia tilted her head up to kiss him. "That is enough. That is everything." They fell asleep tangled together, and Julia dreamed of mountains and open spaces and a future full of possibilities. The first year of marriage brought both joys and challenges. Quinn continued working at the Double T Ranch while Julia expanded her bookkeeping business. Word of how she had saved Mr. Brennan's general store spread, and soon Julia had more clients than she could handle. She was doing the books for half the businesses in Salida, working long hours but loving every minute of it. Quinn and Julia pooled their money carefully, saving toward Quinn's dream of buying land. They lived simply, finding pleasure in small things. Sunday picnics by the Arkansas River. Evening walks through town, hand in hand. Quiet nights reading by lamplight, Julia working on accounts while Quinn whittled or mended tack. They were building a life together, brick by brick, dollar by dollar. In the spring of 1879, Julia discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with excitement and terror in equal measure. Julia was healthy and strong, but childbirth was dangerous, especially out here far from sophisticated medical care. Quinn hovered over her, trying not to show his worry until Julia finally told him to stop treating her like she was made of glass. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," she reminded him. "I will be fine." Dr. Garrison agreed, pronouncing Julia in excellent health and predicting a smooth pregnancy. Julia continued working almost until her due date, only stopping when she became too ungainly to sit comfortably at a desk for hours. Their son was born in November 1879, a long, difficult labor that lasted through the night. Mrs. Carmichael and two other experienced mothers attended Julia, sending Quinn to pace in the other room with a bottle of whiskey for company. When the baby finally arrived with the dawn, Julia was exhausted but triumphant. Quinn entered the bedroom with tears streaming down his face. He held his son with trembling hands, looking down at the tiny red face with an expression of such wonder that Julia felt her own tears start. "He is perfect," Quinn whispered. "You are perfect. I cannot believe this is real." They named him Thomas Quinn Lawrence, after the man whose death had inadvertently brought them together. It seemed right to honor that memory, to acknowledge that their happiness had grown from loss. Being parents transformed them. Quinn cut back his hours at the ranch, wanting to spend more time with his family. Julia worked from home, managing accounts while Thomas slept in a cradle beside her desk. Money was tighter than before, but they managed, and their happiness more than compensated for the financial sacrifice. When Thomas was 6 months old, Quinn came home from the ranch with big news. A neighboring rancher, old Mr. Sullivan, was selling his property and moving east to live with his daughter. The ranch was small, only about 80 acres, but it had good water, decent grazing, and a solid house. The price was fair, and with the money they had saved plus Thomas Whitmore's insurance money, they could just afford it. "It is everything I dreamed of," Quinn said, his eyes bright with excitement. "We could run cattle, maybe keep some horses. There is enough land to support us, and room to expand if we want. What do you think?" Julia looked at her husband, at the hope and longing in his face, and felt her own excitement building. This was the dream they had been working toward since their wedding day. "I think we should go look at it." They visited the Sullivan Ranch the next Sunday, bringing baby Thomas along. The property was beautiful, nestled against the foothills with mountains rising behind it and the Arkansas River visible in the distance. The house needed work, but it was structurally sound, with 3 bedrooms and a large kitchen. The barn and outbuildings were in good condition. Julia could see herself living here, raising children, growing old with Quinn. It felt right in a way she could not quite explain, as if this land had been waiting for them. "Let us do it," she said. "Let us buy this place and build our life here." Quinn swept her into his arms, kissing her soundly while Thomas gurgled happily between them. They made an offer that same day, and by August 1880, the property was theirs. Moving to the ranch was both exciting and overwhelming. Quinn quit his job at the Double T, and they used the last of their savings to purchase a small herd of cattle and the equipment they would need. Julia continued her bookkeeping work, though with fewer clients now that she lived outside town. The income was essential, especially in those first uncertain months. Ranch life was harder than Julia had imagined. There was always work to be done, fences to mend, animals to care for, a garden to maintain. Her hands, once smooth and soft, became rough and calloused. She learned to milk cows, feed chickens, preserve vegetables, and 100 other skills she had never needed in Philadelphia. Some days she fell into bed so exhausted she could barely move, but she was happy. Deeply, profoundly happy in a way she had never experienced before. She loved the rhythm of ranch life, the satisfaction of physical labor, the beauty of watching seasons change across their land. She loved working alongside Quinn, their partnership extending beyond their marriage into every aspect of their daily lives. And she loved raising Thomas in this wild, open country, watching him grow strong and curious and free. Their second child, a daughter they named Margaret Rose, was born in the spring of 1882. Unlike Thomas's difficult birth, Margaret arrived quickly and easily, as if eager to join the family. She had Julia's green eyes and Quinn's dark hair, and from the beginning, she was a force of nature, demanding attention and giving affection freely. Life settled into a comfortable pattern. The ranch prospered modestly, never making them rich but providing enough to live on. Quinn proved to be a natural rancher, his instincts about weather and animals usually correct. Julia's bookkeeping continued to bring in steady income, and she gained a reputation throughout the region for her skill with complex accounts. On their 5th wedding anniversary in 1883, Quinn surprised Julia with a gift. He led her outside after supper to where a wooden sign hung over the ranch entrance. In neat carved letters it read, "Lawrence Ranch, established 1880. "This is ours," Quinn said, his arm around Julia's waist. "Everything we have built, we built together. I wanted to mark that somehow." Julia leaned into him, overcome with emotion. She thought about the frightened young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in Salida 5 years earlier, full of doubt and fear. That woman seemed like a stranger now. Julia had been transformed by this place, by this man, by the life they had created together. "I love you," she said simply. "More than I thought it was possible to love another person. The feeling is entirely mutual, Mrs. Lawrence." The years continued to pass, bringing their share of joys and sorrows. They lost part of their herd to a harsh winter in 1884, a financial blow that took months to recover from. Julia's bookkeeping skills proved invaluable during this time, as she found ways to economize and negotiate better prices with suppliers. They weathered the crisis together, their partnership strengthened by the challenge. In 1885, Julia gave birth to their 3rd child, another son they named Daniel. His arrival brought fresh joy to the household, and Thomas and Margaret doted on their baby brother. The house rang with children's laughter, and Julia often paused in her work to marvel at the life she had built. Quinn proved to be a wonderful father, patient and loving while also teaching the children the skills they would need to survive in this demanding country. Thomas learned to ride almost before he could walk, following his father around the ranch like a devoted shadow. Margaret inherited her mother's head for numbers, and often helped Julia with simple bookkeeping tasks. By their 10th wedding anniversary in 1888, the Lawrence Ranch had become a well-established presence in the Salida community. Julia had expanded her bookkeeping business to include clients throughout central Colorado, sometimes traveling to other towns to consult on complex financial matters. Quinn had increased their herd and gained a reputation for raising quality cattle. They were not wealthy, but they were comfortable and secure, their future certain in a way Julia had never thought possible when she first arrived in Colorado. The town of Salida itself had grown considerably. The railroad had brought prosperity and expansion, with new businesses opening regularly. Julia and Quinn made regular trips to town, attending church, visiting friends, and maintaining the connections that had been so important when Julia first arrived. She never forgot how the community had embraced her, and she made sure to help newcomers when she could, offering advice and practical assistance. One afternoon in the fall of 1888, Julia was working at her desk when she heard a commotion outside. She went to the window and saw Quinn riding in fast, his face troubled. She met him at the door, her heart racing with concern. "What is wrong?" "There is a family stranded down by the river," Quinn said, already turning back toward his horse. "Their wagon broke an axle and they have children with them. I am going to bring them here. Can you prepare some food?" Julia was already moving toward the kitchen. "Of course. Go quickly." An hour later, Quinn returned with a family in tow. The father, Mr. Carson, was injured, his leg badly bruised from trying to repair the wagon. His wife, pale with exhaustion, carried a baby while two other small children clung to her skirts. They looked desperate and defeated, and Julia's heart went out to them immediately. "Come in, please," Julia said, ushering them inside. "You are safe now." The Carson family stayed with them for 3 days while Mr. Carson's leg healed and Quinn helped repair their wagon. During that time, Julia learned their story. They had been heading to California, hoping for a fresh start after losing their farm in Kansas. But the journey had been harder than they expected, and they were running out of money and hope. On the third evening, after the children had been put to bed, Mrs. Carson broke down crying. "I do not know what we are going to do. We barely have enough money to reach California, and when we get there, we have no prospects, no plan. I am terrified we are making a terrible mistake." Julia sat beside her, taking her hand. She saw her own past reflected in Mrs. Carson's frightened eyes, remembered the doubt and fear she had felt stepping off that stagecoach 10 years ago. "Can I tell you something?" Julia said gently. 10 years ago, I arrived in Salida with nothing but doubt in my heart. I was supposed to marry a man I had never met, but he died before I arrived. I had no money, no family, nowhere to go. I was certain I had made the worst mistake of my life. Mrs. Carson looked at her with surprise. "But you seem so settled, so certain of everything." "I am now, but I was not then. What changed was that I decided to be brave. I found work, made friends, built a life. And I met Quinn, and he helped replace my doubt with certainty. Not because he solved all my problems, but because he showed me I was strong enough to solve them myself. We built this life together, piece by piece." Julia squeezed Mrs. Carson's hand. "My point is that doubt is natural when you are facing the unknown, but doubt does not have to define you. You can be afraid and brave at the same time. You can doubt yourself and still move forward." Mrs. Carson wiped her eyes. "How do you know which choices are right? You do not always. But you make the best choice you can with what you know, and then you work hard to make it turn out right. That is all any of us can do." The next morning, the Carson family prepared to continue their journey. But before they left, Mr. Carson pulled Quinn aside. "Your wife, she talked to my Mary last night. I do not know what she said, but Mary seems different this morning. More hopeful. Tell your wife thank you from me." Quinn smiled. "Julia has a gift for helping people see their own strength. She certainly helped me see mine." After the Carsons left, Quinn found Julia in the garden, checking on the last of the autumn vegetables. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "That was good, what you did for Mrs. Carson." Julia leaned back against him. "I just told her the truth about my own experience, about how doubt can be overcome." "You overcame a lot more than doubt, Julia. You overcame loss and fear and uncertainty. You built something remarkable out of nothing." Julia turned in his arms to face him. "We built it, Quinn. Together." "That is what I was trying to tell Mrs. Carson. You do not have to face the hard things alone. When you have someone beside you, someone you trust and love, you can face anything." Quinn kissed her softly. "I am grateful every single day that you said yes when I asked you to marry me. I know it was fast. I know it probably seemed reckless, but it was the best decision I ever made." "Mine too," Julia said. "You replaced my doubt with certainty, Quinn. You gave me forever when I thought I had nothing. I will never stop being grateful for that." They stood together in the garden as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. In the house, they could hear the children playing, their laughter floating out through the open windows. This was their life, built on love and hard work and the courage to take chances. It was not always easy, but it was always worth it. The years continued to unfold. Thomas grew into a capable young man who loved ranching as much as his father did. Margaret proved to have her mother's gift with numbers and began helping Julia with more complex bookkeeping tasks. Daniel was still young but showed signs of being as steady and hardworking as his older siblings. In 1890, Julia's bookkeeping business had grown so successful that she was approached about teaching a course in accounting at the new business school in Denver. It would mean traveling once a month, staying overnight in the city, but the pay was excellent, and Julia found herself excited by the challenge. With Quinn's full support, she accepted the position. Teaching opened up a whole new world for Julia. She discovered she had a talent for explaining complex concepts in ways that made sense to students. She loved watching young people, especially young women, learn skills that would allow them to support themselves. She saw her own past in some of her students, the uncertainty and fear of facing an unknown future. And she tried to give them the same gift Quinn had given her, the certainty that they had the strength to build the lives they wanted. The strain of Julia's increased travel put pressure on the family, but they adapted. Quinn took on more of the household responsibilities, and the older children helped with the younger ones. Margaret, at age 8, proved to be a capable little manager, organizing her brothers and making sure chores were completed. The family grew closer through the challenge, learning to appreciate each other more fully. On their 15th wedding anniversary in 1893, Julia and Quinn took a rare day away from work and children. They rode out to a favorite spot on their property, a meadow near the river where wildflowers bloomed in profusion. They had packed a picnic lunch, and they spread a blanket in the shade of a cottonwood tree. 15 years, Quinn marveled, lying back on the blanket and looking up at the blue sky through the leaves. Sometimes it feels like we just met yesterday. Other times it feels like we have been together forever. Julia lay down beside him, lacing her fingers through his. "I feel the same way. Time moves strangely when you are happy. The days are long, but the years are short." "You have any regrets?" Quinn asked. "About how your life turned out, I mean. You could have gone back east, found a city job, lived a more comfortable life." Julia propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "Quinn Lawrence, I have never regretted a single moment since the day I married you. Yes, ranch life is hard. Yes, there have been times when money was tight or when I was so tired I could barely stand. But this life, This family, this love we have built together is worth every sacrifice. I would choose you and this life 1,000 times over." Quinn pulled her down for a kiss. "Good. Because I was worried you might be getting tired of me." Julia laughed against his lips. "Never. You are stuck with me forever, Cowboy." "Forever," Quinn repeated as if testing the word. "I like the sound of that." They stayed in the meadow until the sun began to set, talking about their children, their dreams for the future, the small joys and large blessings that filled their days. As they rode back to the ranch house, Julia felt a deep sense of contentment. This was what certainty felt like. Not the absence of challenges or worries, but the bone-deep knowledge that whatever came, they would face it together. The final years of the 19th century brought continued prosperity and growth for the Lawrence family. The ranch expanded to include more acreage, purchased from another retiring rancher. Thomas, now a young man of 18, took on more responsibilities, effectively managing the cattle operation alongside his father. Margaret, at 16, had become Julia's full partner in the bookkeeping business, her mathematical abilities surpassing even her mother's. Daniel, at 12, was still finding his path but showed a talent for working with horses. Quinn encouraged this, helping Daniel train and break young horses for sale. It became another income stream for the ranch, and Daniel's gentle way with animals earned him a growing reputation. In 1898, Julia received unexpected news. The business school in Denver where she had been teaching wanted to make her a full-time professor. The position would mean moving to Denver, a significant salary and prestigious recognition of her expertise. It was an incredible opportunity, the kind of thing Julia could never have imagined when she first arrived in Colorado 20 years earlier. She and Quinn discussed it long into the night. The money would be life-changing, and the prestige would cement Julia's reputation. But it would also mean leaving the ranch, splitting up the family, or uprooting everyone. The decision felt monumental. "What do you want?" Quinn finally asked. "Forget about money or prestige or what anyone else thinks. What does your heart tell you?" Julia looked around their bedroom, at the life they had built together. She thought about waking up every morning next to Quinn, about watching sunrises over the mountains, about the satisfaction of working on the land they owned. She thought about being close to her children as they grew into adulthood, about the community they had become part of. "My heart tells me I am already exactly where I want to be," Julia said softly. 20 years ago, I came to Colorado seeking security and stability. I found that, but I also found so much more. I found home, Quinn. I found forever. I do not want to leave that, not for any amount of money or prestige. Quinn gathered her into his arms. "I would have supported you if you wanted to take the position. But I am selfishly glad you are choosing to stay. I cannot imagine this life without you by my side." Julia turned down the Denver position, but negotiated a consulting arrangement that allowed her to work with the school on curriculum development. It gave her the best of both worlds, the ability to influence and teach while remaining rooted in the life she loved. As the new century approached, Julia and Quinn began planning for the future. Thomas was courting a young woman from a neighboring ranch, and there was talk of an engagement. Margaret had been accepted to a business college in Colorado Springs, the first woman in Salida to pursue such education. Daniel continued to develop his horse training business, building a reputation throughout the region. On the last day of 1899, the Lawrence family gathered for a special dinner to mark both the end of the century and Quinn and Julia's 21st wedding anniversary. The table was crowded with family and friends, including Mr. Bennett, now elderly but still running his general store, Dr. Garrison, whose patient records Julia still organized, and Mrs. Carmichael from the boarding house where Julia had first lived. After the meal, Quinn stood and raised his glass. "I want to make a toast. 21 years ago, I went into town to meet a young woman arriving from Philadelphia. She was supposed to marry my friend Thomas, but fate had other plans. When I first saw Julia standing outside that hotel, she looked scared but determined, doubtful but brave. I had no idea that she would become the center of my entire world." Quinn's voice grew thick with emotion. "Julia, you have given me everything. 3 wonderful children, a home filled with love, a partnership that has weathered every storm. You arrived in Colorado with doubt in your heart, and somehow I was lucky enough to replace that doubt with certainty. You gave me forever, and I have tried every day to be worthy of that gift." Julia stood and moved to stand beside her husband, tears streaming down her face. "Quinn, you did not just replace my doubt with certainty. You showed me what it means to be truly brave. You taught me that love is not about grand gestures or perfect moments. It is about showing up every day, working hard together, choosing each other over and over again. You gave me a life beyond anything I dreamed possible." She turned to face their children and assembled friends. "I came to Salida 21 years ago with nothing but a carpetbag and a heart full of fear. This town, this community, welcomed me and helped me find my footing. And this man, this wonderful, patient, loving man, gave me everything I did not know I needed. I found certainty here. I found forever. And I would not change a single moment of the journey that brought me here." The room erupted in applause and cheers. Thomas stood and embraced his parents, followed by Margaret and Daniel. Friends came forward to offer congratulations and share their own memories of Julia and Quinn's early days together. Later that night, after the guests had departed and the children had gone to bed, Julia and Quinn sat on the porch of their ranch house, wrapped in blankets against the cold December air. They watched the stars wheel overhead, the same stars that had been watching over them since that first night they walked home from supper together. "You remember what you said to me that first evening?" Julia asked. "You said the best things in life should be a little terrifying, otherwise how do you know they matter?" Quinn chuckled. "I remember. I was trying to sound wise and probably just sounded foolish. No, you were right. Falling in love with you terrified me. Building this life terrified me. But that terror was proof that it mattered, that you mattered. And every day since then has proven you were right to ask me to take that chance." Quinn pulled her closer. "I used to wonder sometimes what would have happened if Thomas had not died, if you had married him instead of me. Would you have been happy?" Julia considered this. "I think I would have been content. Thomas seemed like a good man and we might have built a decent life together. But I would not have had this, what we have. This kind of love, this depth of partnership, it only comes when 2 people are willing to be vulnerable with each other. I could be vulnerable with you from the start because I had nothing left to lose. And you met that vulnerability with kindness and love." "I fell in love with your strength," Quinn said. "The way you refused to give up even when everything seemed hopeless. That first day I met you, I could see the fear in your eyes, but I could also see the determination. I knew right then that you were someone special." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the night sky. The century was ending, a new one beginning. But for Julia and Quinn Lawrence, the passage of time was just another milestone in a journey they were taking together. The doubt that had once filled Julia's heart was long gone, replaced by the certainty of Quinn's love and the life they had built. She had come west seeking security and had found so much more. She had found home. She had found purpose. She had found forever. As the clock struck midnight, ushering in the year 1900 and a new century, Quinn turned to Julia and kissed her softly. Happy anniversary, my love. Here is to the next 21 years and all the years beyond that. To forever, Julia whispered against his lips. To certainty and love and all the moments yet to come. They stayed on the porch long after midnight, two people who had found in each other everything they had been searching for. The doubt Julia had carried when she first arrived in Salida was nothing but a distant memory now, replaced entirely by the certainty of Quinn's love and the forever they had built together. In the end, that stagecoach ride that had brought her west with fear in her heart had delivered her exactly where she was meant to be, into the arms of a cowboy who had taught her that the best kind of certainty comes from choosing love every single day, no matter what challenges life brings. Their story was one of transformation, of doubt replaced by love, of fear overcome by courage, and of two people who found in each other the strength to build not just a life, but a legacy that would endure for generations to come.